Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Wednesday, May 24th. And I want to pass along an important change notice regarding the Alaska Weather Show. If you haven't already heard, the last TV broadcast of Alaska weather, at least in the traditional sense, over the airwaves, will be on Saturday, June 30th. On July 1st, the National Weather Service will provide a modified web-based version of the program on a new YouTube channel. And you can go find this new YouTube channel. We're going to be moving from @AKwx to @NWS Alaska, and it's perfectly fine now to go ahead and subscribe to that YouTube channel. We'll be posting new content then coming around that time on July 1st. There is a public comment period that is now open through July 30th. This gives you a chance to express any concerns or any favorable memories that you may have had from years past, or some things you would like to have included in the new show format. You can send your comments to nws.service-change-comments@noaa.gov. And if you have any other questions, you can reach carrie.haisley at noaa.gov and donald.moore@noaa.gov. So looking at additional weather information you might find online, you can go to weather.gov, the National Weather Service's online presence. It brings you to a map of the continental U.S. with Hawaii and Alaska to the lower left. On the weather map this Thursday afternoon, we have frost advisories and freeze warnings for the Great Lakes area, air quality alert for much of the state of Iowa, severe thunderstorm watch, eastern New Mexico for damaging winds and large hail, and then flood watch is in effect for southeast Idaho into the northeast corner of Nevada. Here in Alaska, the Yukon River flooding continues to be of concern. We have both snowmelt and ice jam flooding that's going on, and other rivers and creeks throughout the state are going to remain very high here through the upcoming Memorial Day weekend, so keep that in mind if you're going to be out doing any sort of recreating near any of the waterways. We have a cold front that's pushing through the eastern Brooks Range into northwestern Canada. As much as 1 to 4 inches of snow could fall across the central and eastern Brook Range as we go through tonight and Wednesday, especially above 2,000 feet. And then another North Pacific low is going to rotate up into the Gulf on Thursday, bringing some more breezy conditions and rain to areas of the Gulf Coast. And overall, this is a broken record. Below normal temperatures will persist across especially the southern mainland all the way into early June. Quick check of a couple of FAA webcams. We have the Chandalar Shelf there just below Adigan Pass, mostly cloudy, 45 degrees. Temperatures up at Adigan Pass are about 10 degrees cooler when this image was taken. St. Mary's down there in the lower end of the Yukon River under a flood watch for the potential for ice jam flooding, because there's still plenty of river ice in that section of the lower Yukon. Mostly cloudy skies, 49 degrees. Here are the current advisories, watches, and warnings. The orange areas highlight the flood watches. I'm going to go to the next map because it's a little easier to explain. So the areas here you see in the blue are the flood watches. We have a flood watch for snowmelt flooding in the upper Yukon, especially above Tanana, all the way to the Canadian border. The lower Yukon, flood watch for ice jam flooding, and then a flood watch yet remains up along the Kobuk River system, and that is a possibility yet of both some snowmelt and ice jam flooding. Flood warnings remain in effect at Fort Yukon and at Stevens Village due to the heavy runoff and high water levels from all of the snowmelt entering the river system, both the Porcupine and upper Yukon. Downstream flood advisories remain in effect on the Yukon at Ruby, Galena, Koyukuk, Nulato, and then down River, a flood warning remains in effect at Russian Mission, and then below there, flood watches marshal down through St. Mary, Imanak. These areas here still have the potential of seeing some ice jam flooding developing, so it means keep an eye on the river conditions there and be ready to take action if flooding does occur and ice jams are occurring. So overall, through this holiday weekend coming up, we expect the melting and runoff to continue to feed into all of the river systems, so water levels are going to be high on creeks and rivers across most of the state, so just exercise caution if you're going to be along any of those waterways. Fire danger is very high, at least based on the grass and the duff, especially north of the Alaska Range up through the central Yukon Valley, up into portions of the Tanana Valley, Yukon Flats. But there are going to be some scattered showers around this area, and with a little cooler temperatures, fire danger will not be as high. We're not anticipating any really strong winds there the next day or two. Satellite imagery shows one circulation of a low just southwest there of Kodiak Island. Here comes the next low up out of the North Pacific. That low is going to pull north and then hook back toward the western Gulf as we go through late Thursday and Friday. Cold front continues to press eastward up along northern parts of the state into the Canadian Arctic coast, and along this, that's where there could be some snow, late season accumulating snow there, especially above 2,000 feet there through the Brooks Range. And then further west, we have double barrel low pressure system out toward the lower Bering Western Aleutians. The system has some wind and rain, especially just south of the central Aleutians. Here comes that next low out of the North Pacific, and by later tonight, it'll be approaching the lower central portion of the Gulf. On Thursday, the cold front in the north just kind of stalls out, and then behind it in the colder air, there could be some areas of snow, especially along the higher elevations there, the Brooks Range and up along areas of the interior Canadian Arctic coast. And that low, as it lifts northwestward, it'll set up just outside of there of Cook Entrance, and some moderate to locally heavier rain falling along areas of the northwestern and northeastern Gulf Coast. For Friday, that system just kind of weakens, the old frontal boundary weakens along the coast. We continue to have low pressure troughs across the interior, and then back toward the southwest, the next area of low pressure bringing some moderate to locally heavier rain to sections of the Alaska Peninsula. But this is a type of pattern that's not going to allow temperatures to warm up, especially throughout the southern mainland. It's just a cooler and occasionally wetter pattern. Low temperatures Thursday morning, generally in the 40s across the Panhandle and back through south central areas. Daytime highs could get back up around or just above 60. Talkeetna, Glen Allen, 55. Anchorage, temperatures into the 60s across the inner channels and southern portion of the Panhandle from Haines, Skagway down through Craig and Metlakatla. And then back out to looking at Friday morning, low temperatures generally in the 40s, again staying above 40, and daytime highs maybe not much change, just kind of some clouds and a little cooler temperatures across the Cook Inlet area, but back through the Panhandle generally seeing upper 50s to lower 60s. In the far north, colder temperatures below freezing, especially along and south of the Brooks Range, above freezing, 40s, mid-upper 40s along the Yukon River, facilitating additional snowmelt, and temperatures on Thursday afternoon will generally be in the 60s as you go Galena upstream through Fairbanks, and Eagle as warm as 70, but on the backside of that front, temperatures in some areas of the Arctic coast will stay below freezing. Back down below freezing across the North Slope, Brooks Range even near freezing toward Wales, Shishmaref, those areas. And then as we go into Friday afternoon, some moderation in temperatures here in the middle Yukon, maybe back up near 60 degrees as we get toward McGrath and Galena. Otherwise, a bit cooler here across the east central areas due to some cloud cover and some scattered showers. Temperatures across the Aleutian chain in the 40s, highs a little warmer Thursday afternoon as we go up the Yukon and Kuskokwim basins, above freezing for the southwest interior, and readings back up into the 50s. But as I was saying, temperatures are going to average below normal, centered on the southern portion of the mainland into early June. Precipitation may average slightly above normal in east central areas and maybe slightly below normal over the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look now at your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned late this week, Thursday, we have another area of low pressure lifting out of the North Pacific into the Gulf. We'll have rather widespread IFR conditions there, eastern Gulf, northeastern Gulf Coast, outer and northern parts of the Panhandle. Cold front that's pushed south along the spine of the Brooks Range into far northwest Canada. We have IFR conditions associated with lower ceilings and some areas of accumulating snow. And then back out across the Bering, a fair amount of IFR conditions south of the Bering Strait, off of the southwest coast, as well as including the central Aleutians, all associated with another low that will be lifting out into the lower Bering Sea as we go through Thursday into Friday. Now, Thursday afternoon conditions, IFR conditions should at least improve to MVFR there up along the North Slope and Arctic coast, area of IFR southeastern Gulf, and then a broad area of IFR conditions south of the Bering Strait through the central Bering Sea down into the eastern Aleutians. Friday morning, we expect some IFR conditions along the outer coast of the Panhandle, northern areas, and the intercoastal mountains here of the northeastern Gulf. Broad area of the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait through St. Lawrence, down through Nunavik Island, St. Matthew, St. Paul, and areas of the eastern Aleutians. And Friday afternoon, conditions across the Gulf should generally be MVFR, but we do still have IFR conditions, Bering Strait, down through much of the northern Bering Sea and on the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. Pass conditions for Thursday, Anaktuvik Pass in the eastern half of the Brooks Range. IFR conditions early, giving way to MVFR conditions. Ceiling should improve a bit, and that area of lighter precipitation, initially in the form of some snow, should be letting up. Adigan Pass, same thing. IFR tend to be more the north entrance, and as you fly up toward the North Slope early, giving way to MVFR conditions as we go through the later morning and afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill on the south and western portion of the Alaska Range, MVFR conditions Thursday, and as we round up through the central Alaska Range, rainy on up through windy and eastward toward Isabel Pass, MVFR conditions are expected. And then finally, further east toward the Elcan border, we expect VFR conditions at Mentasta Pass, but south of there, as you fly south of there in through the Copper River Basin, MVFR conditions as reflected also at Tanita Pass, MVFR on Thursday. And further south, the length of Portage Pass, generally MVFR conditions. And then finally, in the north end of the Panhandle, we start out with IFR conditions Thursday morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. Freezing levels aloft are highest here across the central interior, middle upper Yukon Valley in excess of 6,000 feet. We see a pocket of colder air aloft here over south of the Alaska Peninsula. And then this frontal boundary, pretty good push of warm air. The dome rises above 10, 12 to 14,000 feet just south of the central Aleutians, and this warmer air is trying to work its way toward the east. Greatest threat for icing will be along areas of the Gulf with that next low that comes up into the Gulf on Thursday, above 8,000 feet along areas of Prince William Sound, above 5,000 feet back toward Bristol Bay, back toward the cooler air aloft. And then with the cold front that had went through the Arctic coast to Brooks Range area, above 5,000 feet here along the Canadian Arctic coast, and then back out here toward the western Bering Sea with an area of low pressure here above 6,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds at 30,000 feet. We have a jet core of 110 knots just south of the Gulf. A low circulation east there of Kodiak Island. Another broad low over the northwestern Bering Sea or along the Kamchatka coast with a pretty good belt. A core of winds up to 120 knots just north of the central Aleutians. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, we still have those two low circulations, one in the western Gulf, the other back toward the central Bering, with the strongest belt of winds here out over the central Aleutians, but we also have some pretty good south winds coming in excess of 50 knots, the coastal mountains here of the northern Gulf Coast. And then at 3,000 feet, we find that low circulation just off of the Kenai with winds of 45 to 60 knots at 3,000 feet along a frontal boundary that's through this region. And then we have the other low back toward north of the eastern Aleutians, circulation around that feature. This translates to potentially some isolated severe turbulence in the northern Gulf Coast, surface to 5,000 feet, a small area of moderate turbulence along the northwestern coast, and then back out here through the central and eastern Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet.
back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Dave Snyder, and joining me today is Cindy Preller. She's the Tsunami Program Manager for Alaska Region's National Weather Service. And Cindy, we hear a lot about tsunamis in the news, probably a lot more than we used to, but let's remind everybody, what is a tsunami?
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Sure.
Tsunami is basically, it's really simple. It's just a disturbance in the water column. So the entire water column from the seafloor to the sea surface is disturbed by something major, usually a major earthquake. But it can also be a volcanic eruption, even an asteroid. Landslide is especially dangerous.
Okay, so if I'm sitting in my bathtub and I drop a bath toy, that could be a bathtub tsunami.
It is absolutely a bathtub tsunami.
Okay, very good. So Alaska is one of the states, or maybe the state, with the greatest amount of coastline, so tsunamis are a pretty major risk here in Alaska. Who is most at risk?
Yeah, Alaska is significant. We actually make most of the Pacific's tsunamis on the Aleutian Trench. And it's where the Pacific plate is subducting underneath the American plate. And we produce some very large, great quakes. And of course, the most at risk is the Aleutian Trench.
Okay.
But that extends into south central Alaska as well. They're at huge risk. And then southeast Alaska's risk is really mostly landslide focused.
Okay. Are there any places along the Alaskan coastline that don't have a tsunami risk, or at least a very, very low risk?
Absolutely. The Bering Sea's risk is very low, and the Arctic's risk is very low as well.
Okay, so when we're talking about tsunami dangers, those are places that need to be monitored, but probably not really.
No, I mean, I won't say never.
Yeah, sure.
Because I know better.
Science knows better.
Right. So
very good.
Near to never.
Okay. Well, let's just say you're on the coast anywhere in Alaska. What are warning signs that tsunami dangers are threatening you right now?
This is super important because Alaska's greatest risk, especially out on the Aleutians and South Central, is a near-field tsunami, and then of course the landslides in southeast. It's even more intense because we can't.
So shorter warning time.
No warning time.
Okay.
The earthquake is the warning.
Okay.
And that is the most important thing for anybody to remember. The water can arrive in less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Wow. Yeah. At the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, we need to get the warning out in 5 minutes. So for those near-field tsunamis. It's the earthquake is the warning. So if you feel shaking, and of course the first thing you do is drop, cover, and hold, and you need to start counting slowly to 20. The right way. How do you do that? Oh, I teach kids to do it with their favorite things. So 1 chocolate, 2 chocolate, 3 chocolate, but you can count anything you like. And if you're thinking of something happy, that helps. Especially helps kids, but it'll help your psyche. So you don't speed up because you're getting stressed out. Right. It actually lowers your heart rate. Interesting. You know, so if you think of something you love and practice that. So you're in an earthquake, you're under the table, you're next to the ocean. Right. This is important if you're next to the ocean. If you're not next to the ocean, don't worry about it. Just stay in place under cover. And you're talking about a mile, a quarter mile? What's close? A mile, even a couple miles. You know, our rule of thumb used to be a mile inland was safe, but the last few tsunamis have taught us otherwise. So, yeah, you know, in Japan we had inundation up to 10 miles. Right. So. And that was a big quake. That was a big quake. So you have a quake, you're counting slowly to 20. To 20. What's next? And if you get to 20 and it's still shaking, you need to evacuate. And that is, that's scary. Yeah. Because you're evacuating in a live event that's still shaking. You know, 1964 shook for 4.5 minutes. Indonesia shook for 12 minutes. Wow. Right. Japan, I think, shook for 6. I'm not sure of that, but it was long. Anyway, more than 20 seconds. And that's a sign of a very major earthquake, the worst. Well, 20 seconds is a magnitude 7, so that's not the worst. But what a magnitude 7 can do is trigger a landslide. And those landslides might be a submarine landslide, so you won't see it, you won't hear it, you won't know it, and then the water's moving. So that's really, really, really dangerous. That's what happened in '64 first. Seward, Valdez, Whittier all had landslides first. And when you're talking about the water is a warning sign too. What happens with the water that gives you a very easy visual sign that something's changing? Not guaranteed. It might go out. It might go way out really fast enough to leave the fish behind. But that's not guaranteed. It might just be a fast flood instead. So either way, if it's acting like a super fast rising tide, faster than a tide should rise. get out of there.
Okay.
And if it goes out really fast, get out of there.
Yeah.
You know, we lost a lot of lives because people will go check out the new tide pools or pick up fish or shells or, you know, so, and it should feel weird.
Right.
You know, it should be weird.
So pay attention to those natural warning signs and how you feel, because those are maybe the only clues you have.
Right, and you know, sound also. You can hear a tsunami. It'll sound like a roaring train, maybe.
Okay.
Or it might sound silent because the water's been pulled out.
Right.
And that's pretty weird. Imagine camping at night near the beach, and all of a sudden you don't hear the ocean anymore.
That would be different.
That would be weird. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you also might hear blowing bubbles, and that's actually from the pressure that's blowing the air out from the sand grains, rock grains. So if you hear blowing bubbles, that's a little weird.
Okay.
Or clinking rocks, you know, like a rain stick. So those are the sound signs. So the visual is rushing in or rushing out, and roaring especially.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of work to get people and keep people aware of what the tsunami warning signs are and what their risks are around Alaska. And there's a website that can help them do that. Where can they go online to get more information for their school, their home, their church, their business?
Oh, there's several. The National Tsunami Warning Center has a website as well, and the easiest way to look that up is just NTWC.
NTWC.
The URL is not intuitive at all.
Okay.
There's also ready.alaska.gov. The state of Alaska has a lot of helpful stuff. Preparedness kits. They have everything you need to get ready.
Okay.
And then for teachers and others, there's a wonderful curriculum called Alaska Tsunami Education Program.
Alaska Tsunami Education Program. Okay.
And that's AKwx.
AKwx. Okay, very good. Those are really good tips to get more information and search that out and help your own community stay safe with the threat of tsunamis around Alaska. Next time we come back and talk to you some more about the Tsunami Ready program and get more in depth and how people can learn more about the risks and what to do here in Alaska. So thank you for joining us today, Cindy. And next time on Alaska Weather Facts, more on tsunamis around Alaska. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we'll start out with the marine segment looking at the state perspective of the ice. We have plenty of sea ice in place along the Arctic coast, the Beaufort Sea coast, and as we drop down through the lower Chukchi Sea, northwest coast, we're starting to see more in the way of openings, especially west there of Wainwright, down to around Cape Lisburne, and then south through the Bering Strait. Pack ice still in place in the vicinity of St. Matthew there through the north central Bering, though more in the way of open water is developing. Still some pack ice there into the central western part of Norton Sound and between the Seward Peninsula and St. Lawrence Island. But overall, we're only now less than a month away from summer solstice, so with the increased sun angle and gradually milder temperatures, this will help facilitate the ice melt-off even further. For the southeast portion of the state, the Panhandle, in inner channels, we're looking for northwest winds 10 knots there, Lynn Canal. Look for south to southeast winds from Dixon Entrance up through Stevens Passage around 10 knots, waves a couple of feet. The outer coast, some stronger winds, 20 to 25 knots off of Sitka and Craig from the southeast. And then as we get up toward and west of Yakutat, 40-knot easterly gales in the vicinity there of Cape Suckling with waves as high as 15 to 17 feet. On Friday, in the inner channels, southeast winds 20 knots, gust to 35 knots there in Lynn Canal. South winds 15 knots, Stevens Passage with 3-foot waves, and then northwesterly winds 15 knots at Ketchikan and Metlakatla. And then for the outer coast, look for south to southwest winds, generally 15 to 20 knots, and waves running right around 6 feet. For the northwestern Gulf, strongest winds will be south of Cordova in the open waters of the Gulf, 35 to 40 knot east-northeast gales with waves of 9 to 11 feet. Northeast winds 25 knots in Prince William Sound, 4-foot waves. And then look for northeast to north winds through upper and middle Cook Inlet, 15 knots with waves of 2 to 3 feet. Easterly winds 15 knots with 4 feet waves at the entrance of Cook Inlet. And on Friday, winds will come down a bit across the region. Southeast winds 15 knots, 2-foot waves Prince William Sound, and generally south-southwest winds 15 to 20 knots there, the length of Cook Inlet, with waves running as high as 4 or 5 feet there west of Homer once you get out toward the entrance. And across Kodiak Island, winds will be northeasterly through Shelikof Strait, 15 knots on Thursday. Variable winds around 10 knots offshore from there all the way down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula to east of Sand Point. On the Bering side, winds try to turn a little more south, southeasterly 10 to 15 knots with waves there 2 to 3 feet. For Friday, winds will be southwesterly 15 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. And as we go down the length of the peninsula, winds will try to turn back more toward the south-southeast at 15 to 20 knots. Waves running anywhere from 3 to as high as 8 feet south of False Pass, and generally 2 to 3 feet along the peninsula there within 15 nautical miles on the Bering side. Across the Aleutians, we've had one system move on through, winds shifting from south-southeast in the eastern Aleutians at 20 to 25 knots back to the west, especially from Atka westward through the western Aleutians. Waves generally running 7 to as high as 11 feet in the North Pacific side, and waves 3 to 7, maybe as high as 8 feet there just northwest of Nikolsky. And on Friday, winds will generally be out of the west-northwest 15 to 20 knots across the Aleutian chain, with waves near 10 feet on the Pacific side and 4 to 7 feet along the Bering side. Southwest coast, look for east winds 15 knots within Bristol Bay on Thursday, north winds out of Kuskokwim Bay, and kind of a mixed winds, variable onshore flow along the southwest coast there, lower Yukon Delta 5 to 10 knots, but a southeast wind as strong as 30 knots there at St. Paul and St. George with waves of 6 feet. And for Friday, there is a low circulation west of Nunavik Island near St. Matthew. Winds will be northeast to east off in Norton Sound and the Yukon Delta at 10 to 15 knots. Look for southeast winds to 20 knots there within Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, and then a westerly winds to 25 knots with 8-foot waves at St. Paul. Arctic coast, east winds on Thursday 15 to 20 knots, as high as 30 knots from the northeast off of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, dropping northeast to north through the Bering Strait. And then on Friday, winds will be easterly as high as 25 knots, Prudhoe Bay on toward Kaktovik. Northeast winds through the lower Chukchi Sea, falling from 20 to 15 knots through the Bering Strait. And we have low pressure in the western Gulf Thursday, another low out here in the lower central Bering. And on Friday, the low dissipates in the western Gulf with the main low near the Alaska Peninsula.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.